Tonight, breaking news. Human remains found in that Florida nature reserve have been identified as Brian Laundrie. The confirmation made using dental records, ending a weeks-long search for the fiancé of Gabby Petito and the only person of interest in the case. The partial remains discovered yesterday, along with Laundrie's backpack and a notebook. And the attorney for Laundrie's family joins Top Story tonight for an in-depth interview, telling us the moment the family learned the grim news.
I did learn of the unfortunate news that Brian's remains were confirmed today through Chris Laundrie.
Also breaking tonight, the House has voted to hold Trump ally Steve Bannon in contempt of Congress after he refused to comply with a subpoena from the committee investigating the January 6th Capitol insurrection. The decision to prosecute now in the hands of the Department of Justice. Threat to kill. The chilling new video of a gang leader in Haiti vowing to kill captive American missionaries if a multi-million-dollar ransom is not met. Gabe Gutierrez on the ground in Port-au-Prince with where negotiations stand now. Teacher sparks outrage. Students filming a white teacher wearing a fake Native American headdress, doing the tomahawk chop, and chanting during a math class. The swift reaction from the school tonight. Killer nurse, the man convicted of injecting air into his patients. Security footage showing him entering the room of a patient right before they died. Prosecutors saying he preyed on those recovering from heart surgery. And right place at the right time. The moment a Marine veteran takes down a would-be robber. Top Story starts right now. And good evening, I'm Tom Llamas. We begin Top Story tonight with breaking news. Human remains found in a Florida nature reserve have been identified as Brian Laundrie. The partial remains discovered yesterday along with Laundrie's backpack and notebook. The FBI saying the confirmation was made using the 23-year-old's dental records. The more than month-long search for Laundrie now coming to an end. He remains the only person of interest in the Gabby Petito case after she was strangled to death while the two were on a cross-country road trip. Her body later found in a Wyoming national park. Moments ago, I spoke to the Laundrie family attorney after his remains were identified. It's his first in-depth on-camera interview. The lawyer telling us about the moment Brian's parents were informed of that grim news. We asked him if he thinks his clients, Brian's parents, will now be charged. We'll have that full interview in just a few minutes, but we begin tonight with Sam Brock, who's on the scene in Florida.
As crime scene cars cycled through this Florida park all day, the FBI confirming late today with dental records that the partial skull uncovered in this reserve is Brian Laundrie's. A sweeping conclusion to a 5-week-long manhunt and dramatic search that captured the country's attention. There was no public comment from the FBI or Northport Police, though the Lee County Sheriff's Department from 40 miles away speaking to conditions in the reserve where Laundrie's remains were found.
We're talking about water levels up above almost the chest area, rattlesnakes, moccasins, alligators.
From above, a view of the FBI's evidence response team performing grid-level searches in the area where Laundrie's belongings and that partial skull were discovered just 24 hours ago. Submerged in water, likely erasing any fingerprints.
That body could be very decomposed, which would mean it has to go to next level, really, of analysis.
Former FBI Special Agent Clint Watts says there's one thing working in investigators' favor, a DNA profile of Laundrie, who's a person of interest in the disappearance of his fiancée, Gabby Petito.
It's much easier to match a profile of a known to an unknown than an unknown to an unknown set, essentially, of DNA and pieces of evidence.
All right, Sam Brock joins us now live on the scene. Sam, can you tell us more about this timeline and what happens next?
Tom, it's a good question because this could have taken a week or so, with the fact of the matter that the remains were found submerged in water for days or potentially weeks, which accelerates the decomposition process, would have made it very difficult to get things pinned down quickly. However, because investigators had been to the Laundrie house, had a DNA profile that could match the dental records, which only takes about a day or two, that's what happened here, and now you have some degree of resolution for this community. Tom?
Sam Brock leading us off with that breaking news from Florida. And just moments ago, I spoke with Steve Bertolino, the attorney for Brian Laundrie's family, in his first sit-down TV interview. Steve, first off, thanks for joining Top Story tonight. So our viewers understand the main reason you are representing the Laundrie family is because you have a long personal relationship with them. I understand you received that grim news that we've just reported. How did you find out, and what exactly did you learn?
Well, yes, good evening, Tom, and thanks for having me. The first thing is, yes, I've known the Laundrie family for over 25 years. Been friends with Chris Laundrie for a long time. I've seen both of his children grow up, Cassie and Brian. And I did learn of the unfortunate news that Brian's remains were confirmed today through Chris Laundrie. You know, Chris had called me, let me know that police had come to his house this evening to inform them that the remains were positively identified.
How were Brian's parents tonight?
Well, Tom, I don't know you if you're a parent or not, but I'm sure every parent out there knows that getting the news that your child is no longer, you know, with you is sad under any circumstances. The fact that the Laundries have been subjected to these people out in front of their house for the last 4 weeks, and they continue out there today, is just making it all the more difficult.
Any idea or theory how Brian may have ended his life?
You know, I don't want to speculate. I try not to do that. I would hope people would stop doing that as well, especially with respect to this case and with respect to, you know, the cause or how Brian is, you know, came to be dead. I don't know. And, you know, we'll wait for, if possible, some type of cause of death from the experts.
Steve, I want to go back to yesterday and that big discovery. I know this is not the first time Brian's parents have aided in the search, but the Laundries did decide to go and help investigators yesterday, both parents. Explain to our viewers what exactly prompted that yesterday.
Well, I think the prompt was that the park, or the Myakkahatchee Environmental Creek Park, was finally open to the public. My understanding, it was either open to the public on Tuesday or Wednesday, and Chris and Roberta decided that since it was open and, you know, available to them, they wanted to go and look for Brian by themselves. After speaking with me, I told them that I wanted to notify law enforcement so that we would have no issue. And, you know, I did text my contact at the Northport Police Department. The response I got was thank you for the heads up. And the law enforcement did show up at 7 a.m. at the park entrance to meet Chris and Roberta.
What do you say to all those people out there who say this is really a strange coincidence? Both parents go out, mother and father, and then suddenly these big clues turn up, including what we now know are the remains of Brian Laundrie.
You know, as I said to you a moment ago, you know, I've known Brian since he was a small child, so this is hitting me today, too. I'm a little bit angry that people are even speculating this way, and primarily because, you know, it's not just the Laundries, it's local PD, it's the FBI. It was an independent news person who happened to be there filming, and that's all fortunate that police were there and the film crew was there. The FBI put out a statement. I forget the gentleman's name. He said, listen, we searched this area several weeks ago. It was underwater. There have been numerous people who have said this area was waist deep in water. I think every searcher who was out there will attest to that. So people with firsthand knowledge of the conditions of that park have said that this was under 2 to 3 feet of water, and yet still John Q. Public can't get it in their head that these areas were inaccessible, and the items that were located today, or I should say yesterday, perhaps couldn't be seen. So we're not just saying it. I'm not just saying it. The FBI is saying it. Everyone is saying it. And yet these platforms are still running amok with these ludicrous and I have to say, you know, nonsensical theories of the parents planting things there. I mean, enough is enough.
Steve, you know, when
does it stop? When do people...
Yeah, we are here today, though, because of the disappearance of Gabby Petito and ultimately her death. You know, the Petito family has been very critical of the Laundries. I want to play you a short clip of the Petito family. I want to get your reaction on the other end.
I believe they know probably, if not everything, they know most of the information. I would love to just face-to-face ask, why are you doing this? And just tell me the truth.
You know this family. You're representing them. How would you describe the Laundrie's interaction with law enforcement?
So, as I mentioned a couple of times today to other news organizations, today is not the day to discuss the Gabby Petito case. I understand that that was the impetus, that is the reason why all this is happening, but that doesn't explain why people come up with these nonsensical theories as to yesterday's events and some other events. It doesn't explain, Tom, why major news organizations just yesterday on Fox News, an anchor was accusing me of communicating with Brian with a burner phone until his solar power ran out and I could no longer communicate. That was from an anchor. You had pundits on CNN just last night with all kinds of theories. So my anger and my frustration, and when I say when does it stop, what I'm saying is when does it stop that these conjecturists, these theorists, people who have no firsthand knowledge, and specifically with yesterday's events, you have people with firsthand knowledge telling you how this played out, and yet people still don't believe it. So I'm going to focus on that. I'm not going to talk about the Petito family. They suffered. No, Tom, let me finish. Yeah. They suffered a grave loss. And on September 14th, when I first went on video, I said there are two families here that have suffered a great tragedy. There are two young people that have now lost their lives. There are parents that are suffering. Now, I understand that. Whatever happened or whatever didn't happen, whatever people know, this is tragic for two families. And anybody with a child and anybody with a sense of humanity can understand the frustration that both families feel.
Steve, on that point, though, I hear you. I hear you on that point, though. You mentioned a date. If you could go back, do you wish you would have helped police out a little bit more early on in the investigation? Because Northport Police, to be completely fair, had to tweet at you on September 15th, days after Gabby Petito was already reported missing. Do you wish you would have maybe worked with police a little earlier in this investigation?
So, Tom, I have to tell you once again, I represent the Laundrie family. I'm an attorney. Communications I have with Brian, communications I had and have with Chris and Roberta are confidential. What I wish really doesn't play into it. What I can tell you is, at some point in the future, there may be conversations to be had. There may be information to be discussed. Tonight is not that time. You know, this case is not over. I have yet to speak to FBI personnel. I have yet to speak to Northport Police. I have yet to speak to the Assistant U.S. Attorney, Ms. Romine, out in Wyoming. There are certain things that need to be done and I should say wrapped up before we can have further conversations of what may or may not have been done differently.
Steve, do you think your clients, the Laundries, Brian's parents, will eventually be charged with crimes?
I have no reason to believe that.
There has been some speculation out there, and again, I understand you don't like to talk about speculation, that maybe some type of deal was cut, that they promised to cooperate with investigators to get some type of immunity. Any truth to that?
I can tell you no, there's no truth to that. What I can tell you is that conversations were had several weeks ago with the FBI with respect to certain charges. When questioned and when communications were had between myself and the FBI, I think it was realized that charges were not appropriate. There was never a threat. There was never a coercion. There was never a deal cut. But
we're talking about misdemeanor charges?
Would not have been
Steve, misdemeanor or felony charges?
I don't know what level of crime or charge was in the mix. What I can tell you is there were conversations that were had, and I definitely want to be clear. There was no threat. There was no coercion on behalf of the FBI. There was no deals. There were certainly conversations, as one would expect happens in every criminal case. You always have conversations with the prosecutors about how the case may play out, as to what may be on the table, so to speak. Yes, those conversations were had, but no deal was cut. The Laundries have been cooperating with law enforcement, both locally and federally, since day one with respect to Brian.
And explain to our viewers,
the Gabby Petito case.
Yeah. If you can explain to our viewers, because we've heard from so many people over the last several weeks on this case, but we've never heard from the Laundries, and there's a reason for that, correct?
Absolutely, and I've said several times, I said it over a month ago, the reason you haven't heard from the Laundries is because I told them not to talk to anybody. I've taken the heat on that, I've accepted the heat on that, and as I've said even last night, as you know, any attorney, any defense attorney, and anybody who went to law school will tell you the same thing. You do not talk under any circumstances. And any pundit who goes on TV and says, oh, I have a law degree and this is immoral and unethical, you know what? You are wrong. This is the job and the role of a defense attorney. You tell your client, do not talk to law enforcement. Period. End of story.
Did your clients know their son, Brian Laundrie, was going to disappear when he left the house that day?
No, they did not. What I can tell you is that Brian was very upset when he left, and Chris conveyed to me several times that, you know, he wished he didn't let him go, but he couldn't stop him. So this has been a painful saga for them since September 13th. It's been a long haul, but Brian is a grown man, young man, 22 years old. He wanted to walk out the door. He was entitled to walk out the door.
You know the Laundries personally. You've known them for several years. You've said that tonight here on Top Story. I want to ask you, what do you want America to know about the Laundries, and is there something they should know about them as parents?
I would like America to know that exactly what you said. Chris and Roberta Laundrie are parents. They are just people. They have feelings. They have children. One of their children have just been confirmed as dead. It's sad under any circumstances. Gabby Petito notwithstanding, for any family, for any parent out there, this is a loss of a loved one. They're grieving. I would just respectfully ask people outside their home, go home, give it a break, get a good night's sleep, leave the Laundries alone, even for one night. Please and thank you.
Do you see any scenario where the Laundries eventually reach out to the Petitos, to Gabby's family?
As I said to you a moment ago, Tom, there are certain things that need to be, I'll use the term wrapped up. There are conversations that need to be had. When those conversations are had, perhaps at some point in the future, you know, there will be, you know, communication between the two families. I've communicated with Mr. Stafford in the past, the Petito family attorney. I'm sure he and I will be having conversations coming forward. And, you know, what comes of those conversations will remain to be seen.
Steve, we thank you for your time. I thank you for answering all of our questions tonight here on Top Story. Steve Bertolino there, the Laundrie family attorney. We want to turn to some other breaking news tonight right now from Capitol Hill. The January 6th investigation, the House voting to hold former White House strategist Steve Bannon in contempt of Congress. A small number of Republicans breaking with the former president as the fight heats up over the investigation. NBC senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake has the latest.
The yeas are 229.
Tonight, 9 Republicans joining with every Democrat to hold Steve Bannon in contempt of Congress.
You cannot blow off a subpoena in America.
We know what this is really about. This is about getting at President Trump.
Referring the former top Trump advisor to the Department of Justice for possible prosecution.
The Department of Justice will do what it always does in such circumstances. It will apply the facts and the law and make a decision consistent with the principles of prosecution.
Bannon had refused to engage with the committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol, despite a subpoena. In letters to the committee, Bannon's attorney argued he is legally unable to comply and had been instructed not to provide documents or testimony by Mr. Trump, citing executive privilege. Some lawmakers believe Bannon had specific knowledge of the planning of the attack.
He knew something. We want to know that information, who helped finance anything along that line.
Today's vote forcing Republicans to choose between supporting Congress's power to investigate or the former president.
Why is it important that Republicans vote to hold him in contempt?
You would think that if they take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, they would vote for the system of checks and balances.
No, they're issuing an invalid subpoena. Issuing an invalid subpoena weakens our power, not if somebody votes against it.
All right, Garrett Haake joins us now from Capitol Hill tonight. Garrett, thanks for joining us. Now that Congress has recommended that the Justice Department prosecute Bannon, walk us through what happens next.
Well, the Speaker's office says that referral is now in the hands of the U.S. Attorney here in D.C. They'll have to make a decision that will probably involve much higher-ranking officials at the Department of Justice, maybe even the Attorney General himself, whether to prosecute and whether they need to go through a grand jury or just file the charges and start the process on Steve Bannon. But there has never been a prosecution where a claim of executive privilege like this has existed. So we're in a bit of uncharted territory here, Tom.
All right, Garrett Haake with that bit of breaking news for us tonight. Garrett, we thank you for that. For more on what's next for Steve Bannon and the battle over the January 6th investigation, NBC News legal analyst Barbara McQuade joins us now. She's a former U.S. attorney and a law professor at the University of Michigan. Barbara, tell us what your sense is here. Do you think the Attorney General Merrick Garland will act here?
I do. So as you just heard, as Garrett just reported, the next step is for the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia, Channing Phillips, to take a look at this with prosecutors and apply what are known as the principles of federal prosecution. And there are a number of factors that prosecutors look at. Not only do we have the evidence to obtain and sustain a conviction, sort of, is the case a violation of the law, but does it also advance a substantial federal interest? And so that's where they'll look at things like making sure it is not being used for political partisan purpose, that this is advancing some important national interest. And here I think there's a very strong argument to be made that if congressional subpoenas are to be taken seriously, we need to deter people who would be inclined to disregard them the way Steve Bannon has. And so I think it's quite likely that they will come down on the side of prosecution.
What happens if he is prosecuted and ultimately convicted?
Well, they would. He would have a trial. If he is convicted, he would be sentenced. The potential penalties are up to a year in prison. What's interesting here is that it does not compel him to testify. And so if what they really wanted was to squeeze his testimony, there may be better ways to do that. But I think that Steve Bannon has made it clear that he has no interest in cooperating. He has no interest in negotiating. He wants to defy the subpoenas. So I think he's being used mostly here as an example. They're going to let him go to prison and use him as a story, as a deterrent for other people who might be inclined to flout the law and defy subpoenas.
Barbara, you piqued my interest here, and briefly, because we don't have a lot of time, how would they squeeze him?
Well, I think if they wanted to, they could consider filing civil charges, a civil case against him, where they could ask a judge to file an injunction immediately and compel him to testify. And then he would be in violation of a court order. That court order would bring with it contempt, and the judge could jail him until he decides to testify for up to 18 months. That's the kind of thing that we saw with Susan McDougal in the Whitewater case when she refused to testify against Bill Clinton. And so there, the pressure is that every day he sits in jail is a day he could change his mind and decide to testify. So that civil route could be more effective, but it does seem like he has got his mind set on defiance.
Barbara McQuade for us tonight. Barbara, we thank you for your analysis. We turn now to the ongoing effort to vaccinate Americans. An FDA advisory panel voting to recommend booster shots of the Moderna and Johnson & Johnson vaccines. The CDC director expected to sign off. The panel also weighing in on mixing and matching vaccines. Miguel Almaguer with the late details.
You're just going to feel a little pinch, okay?
If the CDC director signs off, tens of millions of Americans immediately qualify for boosters. Today, an advisory panel who gave the all clear, poring over pages of data presented by Moderna and Johnson & Johnson, who made the case for an added dose of protection, providing a significant boost in antibodies. With FDA authorization already given, Moderna recipients who qualify are the same as Pfizer's. Those vaccinated at least 6 months ago who are 65 and older are at higher risk of catching the virus. For Johnson & Johnson, all who've been vaccinated at least 2 months.
We are constantly learning about this virus, but together we can be prepared and make the best recommendations to protect the greatest number of people.
The CDC will also do what the FDA did not, tell the inoculated what vaccine they should receive, how and when. With mixing and matching boosters also discussed by the panel, the data shows those given a dose of Johnson & Johnson get the highest level of protection when boosted with Moderna or Pfizer.
You were vaccinated with Johnson & Johnson and you're eager for a booster. Yes, we are. I think that the extra layer of protection will make us feel more comfortable.
With 9.5 million Americans already boosted with Pfizer, well over 30 million could soon qualify for an added shot of protection. It comes just as deaths, infections, and hospitalizations drop nationwide.
It's depressing, and I wish everybody would get vaccinated.
But in cold weather states where many are gathering and spreading the virus indoors, there are troubling signs of a rise in cases. Tonight, our nation hoping to fend off another surge while offering millions another dose of protection.
And on that news, Miguel, we understand the CDC is also closely monitoring, we almost hate to say this, another variant that's spreading overseas.
Yeah, you certainly hate to hear about news like this, Tom. They're watching a strain that's a spin-off of the Delta variant over in the UK. They're seeing a rising number of cases here in the U.S. Right now, they say the numbers aren't alarming and the strain doesn't appear to be necessarily more dangerous, but it's certainly something they're going to keep a close eye on. Tom?
All right, Miguel Almaguer for us live tonight. Miguel, thank you. Next tonight to Haiti, the hostage crisis there growing more dire by the day. A disturbing new video posted to social media showing the gang leader holding 17 missionaries captive, threatening to kill them. All of his demands aren't met. NBC News correspondent Gabe Gutierrez reports from Haiti tonight.
The new video, shared widely on social media today and apparently shot yesterday, shows the leader of the 400 Mowozo gang, who authorities say is holding the 17 missionaries for $1 million per person ransom. He says if his demands aren't met, he will shoot them. This morning, gunfire from Haitian police breaking up a roadblock near the Port-au-Prince airport. Minutes earlier, a crowd had gathered, furious with the government amid a spiraling economic crisis, fuel shortages, lawlessness, all-out desperation. We'll occupy the streets until further notice, this man says. Across the capital city, pockets of smoke signal the growing unrest. This has become daily life here in Haiti. Tires burning on city streets, protesters furious at the government's inability to confront kidnappers. This is happening over and over again, making many roads here in Port-au-Prince impassable. Humanitarian aid organizations like Doctors Without Borders are struggling to keep operating. Earlier this year, one of their staffers here was shot dead.
Today, the situation is very difficult for the population to get access to health care.
In the U.S., today the Ohio-based Christian Aid Ministries prayed for the kidnappers, reading a letter from the families of the hostages.
We thank him that he is God and ask him to hear our prayers and bring our families home.
The families are from Amish, Mennonite, and other conservative communities across multiple states and Canada.
They continue to band together and support each other with prayers.
Adding to the instability here in Haiti, the country's national police chief has just resigned. No reason given, Tom.
All right, Gabe, thank you. Another major headline developing overseas tonight. Buckingham Palace revealing that Queen Elizabeth was hospitalized overnight. Let's get right to Molly Hunter in London.
Tom, good evening. Palace officials are saying tonight that the Queen went into the hospital yesterday afternoon for what they're calling preliminary investigations. She returned to Windsor Castle today, and they say she's in good spirits. This comes after she canceled a trip to Northern Ireland, a move Palace officials say she made reluctantly after doctors urged her to get some rest. Now, Tom, the Queen is 95 years old. We last saw her hosting a lavish event Tuesday night at Windsor Castle. John Kerry was there, Bill Gates was there, and she's had an incredibly busy few months. We really haven't seen any signs of her slowing down until now. Tom?
All right, Molly Hunter on that breaking news. Molly, thank you. Still ahead tonight, killer nurse convicted. Have you heard this story? The former nurse found guilty of capital murder after injecting his patients with air. The chilling video played for the jury. Plus, onions now blamed for a major salmonella outbreak linked to hundreds of illnesses. What you need to know. And the math teacher sparking outrage after she was filmed wearing a fake Native American headdress and chanting. Stay with us here on Top Story. We're just getting started. Back tonight with the story of a high school teacher in California in the spotlight for a math lesson that involved what appears to be a fake headdress, dancing and chanting while teaching. Tonight, the school district is addressing the controversy amid growing fallout. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson has that story.
California teacher is now on leave after this video went viral. The teacher appears to be explaining SOHCAHTOA, a term used to help memorize trigonomic functions, often criticized when paired with offensive native imagery. In the more than 2 minutes of video, which has now been viewed by millions online, the Riverside teacher is seen in a headdress made of paper feathers with imaginary tomahawks in her hands, hopping around the room and screaming. The video was filmed by a student in the class, according to family friend Akale Brown, who then clipped the video and uploaded it online.
How is that student doing? The student is very concerned, actually, for the well-being of the teacher. He's actually said he was happy that it happened to him. We're glad it happened with someone who was able to digest it instead of internalize it and go home and hurt themselves.
At one point, the teacher is seen jumping on top of desks and stomping before sitting atop her own desk and calling out to the, quote, water goddess.
Because obviously this is ridiculous. We think of Native people as existing in these primitive past tense stereotypes.
Elizabeth Ellis is a Native woman and history professor at New York University.
And if you are expecting Native people to be running around in leather and feathers, it's hard to think of them in the contemporary moment. And this actually really limits our access to political power and to be taken seriously as Native people.
Neither the teacher nor the school where the incident allegedly occurred responded to NBC's request for comment. In a statement posted online, the Riverside Unified School District said, quote, these behaviors are completely unacceptable and an offensive depiction of the vast and expansive Native American cultures and practices. The district says the teacher has been placed on leave as they conduct a full investigation.
I hope that they do some re-educating and that they make sure that something like this never happens again to a Native student.
All right, Priscilla Thompson joins us now on set. There are a lot of things confusing about that video. I think one of the main ones is it's not even a history lesson. It was a math lesson or a social studies. It was math, which is completely baffling. But you spoke to a lot of experts and some advocates, and they think something positive could actually come from this incident?
Right. They think this could be an opportunity to have constructive conversation around representation of Native American people and what that looks like in schools. And one of them also mentioned Halloween is right around the corner. We know there are going to be some folks out there who would probably like to dress up as a Native American, and this is an opportunity for them to perhaps rethink some of those decisions too. Tom.
Okay, Priscilla Thompson with that video and that story tonight. Priscilla, thank you. When we come back, China right in our backyard in the Caribbean. The country now investing millions of dollars in island nations that are thousands of miles from Beijing. Our Vaughn Hilliard travels to Antigua with an inside look at where that money is going. And Marine versus gunman, have you seen this video? The veteran taking down an armed robber before that guy could even realize what happened. We'll tell you the story. Stay with us. Back now with Top Stories news feed as we continue our coverage after Brian Laundrie's remains were identified. His attorney speaking with us tonight. The partial remains found yesterday in a Florida nature reserve along with Laundrie's backpack and notebook. His attorney now shedding light on how Brian was behaving before he left for the reserve more than a month ago.
What I can tell you is that Brian was very upset when he left, and Chris conveyed to me several times that, he wished he didn't let him go, but he couldn't stop him.
Laundrie remains the only person of interest in the death of Gabby Petito. The Long Island woman was strangled to death while the two were on a cross-country road trip. Also tonight, new video of a Marine veteran taking down a robbery suspect in Arizona. Surveillance video shows the masked suspects walking into the gas station in Yuma when the veteran quickly disarms one of them, knocking him in the face. He was able to keep the teenage suspect detained until police arrived. Two other suspects, though, managed to flee. A former Minneapolis police officer who fatally shot a 911 caller was resentenced to 57 months behind bars. Mohammed Noor had already been serving time for a third-degree murder sentence for the killing of Justine Rusek. In 2017, a state Supreme Court tossed that charge last month, and he was resentenced for second-degree manslaughter. He will receive credit for time served. And a health alert tonight. A salmonella outbreak has been linked to onions. The CDC says more than 650 people across 37 states have been sickened. The outbreak reportedly linked to red, white, and yellow onions imported from Mexico. They were distributed by ProSource Inc. at grocery stores and restaurants nationwide. And hackers have targeted candy corn just over a week before Halloween. Gizmodo first reporting this one, that Ferrera Candy, which produces Brack's famous candy corn, was hit with a ransomware attack. The company says it has resumed production in some facilities. The hack now under investigation. Ferrera is responsible for 85% of all the candy corn sold during Halloween season. All right, next tonight to the Texas nurse convicted of killing 4 patients after injecting them with air. The prosecution introducing even more victims today, and he's now facing the death penalty. Morgan Chesky reports.
Tonight, a Texas hospital nurse convicted of a horrifying string of murders now facing the death penalty as jurors decide his fate in his sentencing hearing.
We're going to ask you to find him guilty of capital murder because it's exactly what he did.
Prosecutors say William George Davis, who worked at the Christus Trinity Mother Frances Hospital, injected several patients with air following heart surgeries in 2017 and 2018. 4 of those patients died after suffering unexplained neurological problems.
He killed these 4 patients. He did it on purpose. He did it by injecting air into their arterial lines. There's no other way.
Security footage played during the trial shows Davis entering the room of one of those patients. His heart monitor alarm sounded 3 minutes later. He then died. During today's sentencing hearing, the Smith County District Attorney promising to reveal at least 6 additional victims not brought up during the trial. Davis's defense team argued their client made a convenient scapegoat for the hospital, which could blame him when things went wrong during surgery or other medical treatments, saying he just happened to be there during those deaths.
I don't think he did it. I don't think the evidence shows that he did it. And if you follow the law, you'll understand that as well.
One of the prosecutors said the hospital hadn't changed any of its procedures since Davis left, and that there had not been any similar incidents in closing arguments, claiming that Davis, quote, liked to kill people.
All right, Morgan Chesky joins us now from Dallas, Texas. Such a strange and bizarre story. At today's sentencing hearing, prosecutors heard from several survivors who weren't mentioned in the trial. What are they alleging that William Davis did to them?
Yeah, Tom, well, they're alleging that he certainly acted outside of the capabilities of that nurse position. But I also want to talk about 2 other victims that were not mentioned during the trial. Number one, a gentleman that investigators say died after having air injected into his veins, not arteries like those other patients. And there was another victim, a man that investigators say had such high levels of insulin injected into his body that it caused his glucose levels to crash to what proved to be a fatal amount.
You know, Morgan, I got to ask you, these incidents took place from 2017 to 2018, I think. Why did this trial get delayed so much?
It really was a culmination of several things. Number one, the pandemic pushed this back in the courts. Number two, this could be described as having kind of a revolving door of attorneys. Those 2 situations combined ended up with what we have today, and that is years after the fact, a trial that could be described as one of the highest profile cases in East Texas in potentially the last decade or so. Tom?
All right, Morgan Chesky with that report tonight. Morgan, we thank you. Next tonight, as Washington debates the future of America's infrastructure, China is investing heavily in other countries right now and right in our backyard. The Chinese government launched a massive global effort 8 years ago, and so far, 140 countries have signed on, including Cuba just this week. But there's also other nations, some of them thought to be America's allies, that are signing up. Vaughn Hilliard traveled to one of them.
This pristine Caribbean island is nowhere close to China. But today, China's presence here in Antigua, right in the backyard of the U.S., is increasingly obvious and defining. $5 million toward construction of the island's university, a $50 million loan for its renovated airport, a $55 million grant for a cricket stadium. In the country, even constructing a Confucius Institute to connect Antiguans to Chinese culture. Gaston Brown is serving his 8th year as Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda.
Just how much has China invested in financing or in grants?
It would be in the region of about $200 million US, which is sizable for a small country like Antigua and Barbuda. So again, China has proven to be a very reliable partner.
On average, annually, China is spending 2 to 1 compared to the U.S. in overseas development. This island is just a microcosm of how expansive China's reach is becoming. Antigua and Barbuda is one of 140 nations now partnering with China as part of its Belt and Road Initiative, building infrastructure across the world.
What does all of these investments get China ultimately?
It gets China's strategic position in the Caribbean.
China China strengthening its partnerships in the process. In 2020, a vote came before the UN Human Rights Council to condemn China for its crackdown of pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong.
Antigua and Barbuda voted in support of mainland China. If it weren't for China's investments in your country, would you have voted differently? We, as you know, have a very good relationship with China. We don't want to get involved in that kind of geopolitical issue. We'd have obviously voted to maintain our relationship with China.
In China's expansion near U.S. shores, a concern militarily.
The fact that the PRC doesn't have any bases today does not mean that it couldn't leverage the very strong military-to-military relationships that it has and the familiarity with those facilities, such as the port facility that it's building right there.
Are you able to commit that Antigua and Barbuda will never allow China to operate a submarine station or a military installation on your land or off your shores?
Absolutely. Answer to that is yes. We would not allow it to happen.
And this right here is their port, being completely rebuilt. For now, economic positioning. A majority of the construction team, Chinese workers.
Our three basic needs, food, clothing, and shelter, comes through here. The Chinese have played a significant role. They've financed the port. They are constructing the port.
The water's being dredged so the port can manage 8 times more the amount of container goods. China already buying and shipping their lobsters.
China is a great friend of Antigua, and I enjoy doing business with them.
The web of Chinese financing, though, is complicated. Chinese banks are estimated to have loaned at least $137 billion to countries in the region in the last 15 years. When directly asked how much the country has invested in Antigua, an official with the Chinese embassy here wrote back, "I do not have that information. Such cooperation is carried out on the premise that it serves the interests of Antigua and Barbuda. Nothing we do is out of political calculation. We would hope that our American friends refrain from mischaracterizing our intention."
Is the U.S. doing enough for developing countries like Antigua and Barbuda?
Well, I would say that they have not done enough for the Caribbean, and I think there should be a refocusing, and clearly there's still some developmental gaps within the region, and the United States has resources to assist.
Okay, Vaughn, so on that point right now, as you join us live from Antigua there on the island, I got to ask you, what is the U.S. play here if China's already there and already invested?
Exactly. That's the difficult part for the U.S., Tom. This summer, President Biden urged the other G7 countries to come together to counter China and offer hundreds of millions in dollars in similar type of financing to developing countries. But at this moment, there's nothing publicly concrete here. And this is the difficult part. You know, I was talking with some U.S. banking officials, and one of those individuals told me, look, the Chinese will always win at limbo against the United States. They're always willing to go lower. They're going to offer lower interest rates and without the same strings attached. And any deal that the U.S. makes with any developing country will come with other commitments, from human rights to climate justice. This is a tough circumstance and a tough situation for the U.S. One other note is that President Xi is slated to meet with President Biden by the year's end at a virtual summit. We should expect the Caribbeans here to come up as part of any of those conversations. Tom?
Okay, Vaughn Hilliard with a really fascinating report tonight. Vaughn, thank you. Now to Top Stories Global Watch. El Salvador has held up the country's total abortion ban. Activists have been calling on Congress to approve exceptions in the case of rape, risk to a woman's health, or life-threatening deformities. Lawmakers overwhelmingly voted to maintain the current law. Women there face up to 40 years in prison for abortion-related convictions. And it appears a group of dogs trapped between lava on Spain's La Palma Island have finally been rescued. Authorities were planning to pull the dogs to safety using drones today. However, when they arrived, the dogs were gone, and video picked up what appears to be human footprints. An animal activist group now claiming they have rescued those animals. When we come back, history on Broadway. A record number of black writers now have shows on the big stage, and our Ron Allen sits down with some of the creators who are breaking barriers and changing the industry one curtain call at a time. Stay with us. Next on Top Story, Broadway is back and making history this time. For the first time ever, 7 black playwrights have shows on the big stage. Is it a sign of things to come? Our Ron Allen sat down with some of those trailblazers.
And when you stand, take a stand for change.
There's a call for change echoing through Broadway's iconic theaters.
We can curse the dark,
many of its brightest black stars demanding diversity and inclusion in a place known for all of its glittering lights as the Great White Way.
We want change in every area that we're in. We want to see equal representation and belonging.
LaChanze is a Tony Award-winning actor who says Broadway seems to be listening. She's the star in Trouble in Mind, ironically a story about racism in the theater industry written back in the 1950s. One of a record 7 plays by black writers opening this season on Broadway. How big a deal do you think this really is?
This is tremendous. I think it's a huge deal. We've never had this on Broadway. We haven't had it in recent decades. There was no time in history when we had this many black playwrights having their work featured on Broadway, telling the diversity of stories that are particular to the black community.
It's a victory for diversity advocates who've negotiated a so-called New Deal for Broadway agreement with theater owners and producers that sets standards for more diversity in all aspects of the industry. The shows range from comedies like Chicken and Biscuits about hidden family secrets exploding at a family funeral, the more cerebral Thoughts of a Colored Man, about the lives of 7 black men in Brooklyn, New York. Why do you think it is that this hit Broadway now?
Well, they had to respond. Broadway and every medium has to respond to the racial strife, the discourse in this country.
Ruben Santiago Hudson stars in Lackawanna Blues, a one-man show about the adoptive mother who raised him. Later in the season, he'll also direct Skeleton Crew, about an auto factory in Detroit on the brink of closing. He has no illusions about how tough it will be for these plays to be successful financially, especially with audiences just finding their way back after Broadway's longest shutdown ever and with new COVID protocols.
The victories aren't always monetary, financially. That could be how you built your audience, community-wise. But now we're bringing, black people are coming in masses to Broadway. Do they keep them is the question. How do they maintain them?
With the season just getting underway, Broadway theaters are keeping tight-lipped about box office numbers, concerned that the apparently slow start may discourage people from coming. Meanwhile, the push for change keeps playing to as wide an audience as possible.
Take a stand for change.
Ron Allen, NBC News, New York.
We thank Ron for that great story. When we come back, official reunion. The military dad waiting more than a year to see his son pulling off the ultimate surprise on the gridiron. This story is amazing. Please stay with us. All right, finally a surprise under the Monday night lights. A father returning from deployment overseas, stopping at nothing to see his son's last regular season football game. Set to meet at the 50-yard line before kickoff, a trick play is about to happen, and it's one Fred Grooms III will never forget. He's a freshman on the Helena High School football team, walking out for the coin toss just before last week's game in Alabama. Fred, number 28, taking the field side by side with his teammates, shaking hands with the opposing players, listening to the head referee's instructions, but confused at what he was saying.
I was kind of weirded out that they told me to look at every single one of the refs and recognize and memorize their face.
Fred doing a double take, his eyes widening, realizing the referee lined up across from him wasn't just any official. It was his dad, Fred Grooms Jr., home from his deployment overseas in Kuwait. He's been away from his family for nearly a year.
Watching him walk up unaware was really exciting, but then also kind of nerve-wracking because I hadn't seen him in almost a year. And when I left, he was 3 inches shorter than me, and when I came back, he was 2 inches taller than me.
The two shaking hands, and then a long overdue hug. A moment so heartwarming it deserves a replay. Let's see that again. Players from both teams and the referees cheering the reunion on. Grooms' return actually wasn't supposed to happen until early November.
I've been lucky and fortunate enough to be at all the events, sporting events, school events, and this year was probably the one time where I did not have that opportunity.
But with Fred's last regular season game coming up, Grooms' commander giving him the go-ahead to leave early so he could see his son play a high school football game for the first time.
I had been at every game before now, with no exceptions, and so that was, for me, it was a big deal.
The Huskies headed to the playoffs next. Fred plans on being right back in the stands to cheer on his son. This time, no surprise necessary.
Go Huskies. Can't get any better than that.
Go Huskies is right. We thank the grooms for sharing their story. Thanks so much for watching Top Story tonight. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.